Hello, this is Lauren Carr, and welcome to Authors on iTours, a podcast devoted to authors, book bloggers, and other book lovers alike. Today, we are interviewing Lisa Slabach, the author of 10,000 I Love Yous. Lisa's new release will be on tour with iRead Book Tours from March 28th to April 22nd. Prior to publication, her first novel, Degrees of Love, was recognized as a best book of 2014 by Kirkus Review. Degrees of Love made its publishing debut December 1st, 2017, and was nominated for a 2017 Reviewer's Choice Award by RT Book Reviews. In addition to writing, Lisa is a Fintech Relationship Executive for a Fortune 500 company. She is a longtime resident of Northern California and lives with her husband, 140-pound puppy, and numerous goldfish. In her free time, she enjoys wine tasting, shopping with her daughters, and cooking in her pink kitchen. So sit back, put your feet up, and we invite you to join us as we have an exciting conversation with Lisa Slabach. Well, now let's talk about Degrees of Love. That was your first novel, and it was recognized as the best book of 2014 by Kirkus Reviews. Can you tell our readers a little bit about that? And is it similar, or what changes did you make between that one and 10,000 I Love Yous?
Yeah, so that's interesting because it was my first book. And at the time, I was traveling a lot with work. So at the time, I was a sales director and traveling a lot, was in hotels a lot. And started had some free time in the hotels that kind of got me going a bit with all and I didn't know if it was good or not good. My husband had a friend who was an agent, so said, hey, my wife's book. And he said, I actually think it's pretty good. And this was, a long time ago, probably 2010, like that. But, like any book that I had done, maybe 2 drafts and not sure as a writer because I'd never written anything in life other than papers for school or program guides for theater, like that. But I'd never written creative fiction. So he said, yeah, I'll agent it. Let's work on it and I'll agent it. I said, okay, that sounds great. But then he decided to get out of agenting. He also had his law degree, and he went to work for California Arts. So
isn't that funny how that happens?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I was at a writers conference where they had agents and a panel of agents, and somebody in the front row asked, I've had 3 agents die on me. And and somebody said, is this a confession? This guy said, I've had 3. He said, every agent has died.
God, that's horrible. But it does happen. You get an agent, they disappear. So I worked on it, and then I decided to just go ahead and because I put out some queries and I couldn't get any interest, and I'll just self-publish and see how it goes. And so I thought, well, like a good thing to get a review and then to use the review for marketing. So I submitted to Kirkus, and it came back with a starred review and best book of 2014. And I didn't even have it published. I didn't even have cover art when I sent in. That's how naive I was. I mean, I was really naive sending it out, but it was pretty thrilling. I mean, I actually got an agent after that. It was surprising. I wrote that book, and a lot of it does come from law with people who travel in hotels, and some things got me going on the idea. I was in a hotel one night And I saw this couple in a bar, and then like, oh, together. And then it was obvious that they weren't married and they went separate directions. And so it kind of got me thinking. Of course, I've heard about fair.
So well, now why don't you tell for people who what is the plot line, or what, can you tell us about the plot
line? That would be kind of important, right?
Yeah. Because you got everybody intrigued. So okay, so
like love boat. So the plot line that we've got a woman who's about 36 years old, and she has an MFA in acting. And her plan was to go to New York and be an actress. But she married a guy, a biologist, who she met while she was in grad school. And he got his break with a job in Silicon Valley. So instead of her in New York to pursue acting, she goes to Silicon Valley so he could his dream of what he wants to do.
Yeah.
And at the time, okay, fine, we're going to live in San Francisco. Well, they don't live in San Francisco. They live in Silicon Valley. There's literally minimal theater in Silicon Valley. Not that it exists, but there's not enough there to make a living as an actress and do that. She gives up that, and she decides that she's going to pursue sales, because she's sales, and that's the way she's, had her day jobs when she was in and so forth. And she does extremely well. And now she's a senior vice president for a tech company. Gets a promotion that puts her on the road, and she meets her new boss, who's a young guy, Harvard grad, very ambitious, and they fall in love. And all the fissures that she's seen with her marriage, that she's kind of put aside, desires that she's put aside, she sees the way she's been marginalized in the relationship, and that leads her down a affair that puts her in a real conflict. As, do I stay for the good of my, even though I'm not happy, or do I leave and tear my heart, which would be good for me, but not for them? So that's her conflict in this story. At the same time, she's balancing being a mother, and obviously she can't sustain that, it's going to, so it comes to a head, and she has to make some decisions about her life, and her and her family, and make some hard decisions. Mm-hmm. So that's about, and in writing that, I did write heavy scenes between her and her husband that were really hard to write. And at times I would say pretty emotionally raw, Mm-hmm. And of course, being married, I didn't get divorced, no affair, but I do know what it's like to have some pretty intense spouse. If you've been married for a long time, you're going to have them. Mm-hmm. Nobody can go 35 years in a marriage and not have a fight.
Yeah, that's true. And those who don't, they generally they don't care enough to fight.
That's right. They just don't care, right? And I have to say that our most intense fights when I was with my marriage were probably in that time period when we were both growing, right? And demands of kids, and it's a really hard time. When your career is established and you're cruising, your kids are older, things are easier. But when you're trying to get a career going and you've got kids, it's really hard when you're both doing that. So that's kind of the situation. I can pull some of that, from personal knowledge. And by no means do I always say the things that we said or anything like that, but you take what you know and you in a very true manner, and really tap into the emotions and get it down on the page. And I think I succeeded with that. And I think that's why Kirkus honored me with that award. But in writing that, I needed a break sometimes because it was just, I'm so drained. So I decided I was going to write this rom-com about a woman who gets divorced or is pregnant. So she has a baby like when she's 18. And so she gets divorced when she's 30. And her daughter and her kind of look alike. So it's going to have her move to and pass herself off at 25 and have some funny things with her daughter and her being mistaken identities. And, you know, I had this little idea going, doing some of that, you know, the lighter thing. And then Younger, the movie Younger, I guess it was a book. And then it, I'm sorry, television series. It was basically the same kind of plot. So I was like, there goes my story. So we did it.
Oh.
But I took sort of the base of that and pulled from it as sort of a counterpoint piece. So with Degrees, you've got a woman who's unhappy in her marriage, and in 10,000 I Love Yous, we've got a scenario where we've got a young couple get married. She gets pregnant in high school. They decide to go ahead and get married. No abortion, no adoption. They're going to get married. They're going to make their life a success, and they do. So just as their daughter becomes ready to go off to college, she reveals that he's not happy in the marriage and leaves.
So it's sort of flipped from Degrees of Love because he's the one who's unhappy.
Because he's the one that's unhappy. So kind of looking at it from a different perspective of the woman being left, and she gets back to her happy and how they work things, which is different. So I do explore a lot of the same themes of what it means to be married for the long haul, themes about forgiveness, themes about being true in a relationship. Those are some of the same themes I think that you find in both books and through. The big difference is that I think Degrees of Love is heavier in nature. There's some humor in it, but it's definitely heavier in nature. Whereas YOUS, even though, you know, it's a serious subject matter, in tone, it's a little, I would say. And it's in terms of narrative focus, it's still very much the main character who's a woman's journey. So it's not, and here's a funny thing with it too. I know a lot of people call it a romance, but it's not a romance in terms of genre romance. There's romance in it. There's romantic, but the story is not about two people meet, they have and they're going to be together at the end of the book for a happily ever after. So that's the difference, I think. And that's true in both books. Even though both books get categorized sometimes as romance by various, if category romance, it's not.
Now, what do you hope readers take away from 10,000 I Love Yous?
I really hope that they take away that there is the idea of a happily ever after is great escapism, and I love reading romance. I read several romances every month, and I love it. But my book is a little bit more realistic relationships because I write women's fiction. There are going to be bumps in the road in relationships, and if you have a long haul with somebody, you have to learn how to understand about what you're going through, and you have to be able to forgive each other. Forgiveness is a big thing, I think, in maintaining relationships. I'm not saying that, hey, somebody, hits me, that's okay. I forgive you, but I'm not going to be with you if you hit me. So I'm not
Yeah.
talking about, abuse, but I'm just talking about regular things that happen in a relationship.
I think that's why there are so many divorces, is because, it's now to the point that, well, if it doesn't work out, we'll get divorced.
Right.
Well, marriage is, no, you don't, that's not the first thing you jump to.
No, it's not. It's not. You have to talk. You have to understand your partner's perspectives. And so I hope that that's what they kind of get from it. Is just that idea that you can long haul. And as long as somebody hasn't done anything in terms of physical abuse, mental abuse, that sort of thing, that it's good to work things
Well,
in.
let's talk about that. You used to be a stage actress and director, and how did that experience actually influence your writing in both your novels?
Well, honestly, I think it's what kind of got me, because I was a stage actress. I have an MFA in acting. I was doing theater in Chicago, and that whole thing. And it was, but when I had my daughter, the desire to do theater just appeared. So when she was born, I did do a stage reading in Chicago. When she was about 3 weeks old, say. And so that gave me the first tug that, I didn't know if I wanted to leave her. Then when she was probably about 2 months old, I was invited to go watch a stage with the idea that perhaps I would like to direct the play. And about half through, I knew that I did not want to be gone nights. So completely I told them, thank you, no thank you, and hustled. I figured if I hustled home, I'd be able to make it for our next feeding. And that's when I kind of anymore want to be at home at night with my babies. So left me sort of a gap, right? A creative gap, let's put it that way. And and to fill the gap, I did do lots of things with kids on the weekend, and I threw myself into cooking and kind of things. But then when they got to be a certain age, then it was like, wow, I need a creative outlet. And before I knew it, I started, and that became my creative outlet. And I realized what I liked about it. I was the actor in the play. I was playing all, right? I was the playwright, so I was writing the dialogue. I was also the director because I was telling people where to go. So I was like, universe. I didn't have anybody arguing with me.
Yeah, that's true.
So it really did play into it. I think, in studying theater, I did study a lot structure and, how to build a scene and building layering on conflict. So I think that comes in quite a bit. Studying structure a lot and breaking down structure, breaking down scenes, knowing the beat. That definitely comes into play when I'm writing, because I do think about the beats of a scene. I do think about one of the techniques with actors, of course, is you have to know what wants in a scene. And so I really think about that when I have a scene of two people of both want, because everybody wants something when you're in an interaction.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they aggressively want something, but they want something. So that definitely comes into play. Most definitely with the dialogue, it comes into. I catch myself sometimes where I write like of dialogue and no narrative.
So, that's very easy to do. Yes.
Right, because with plays, all it is dialogue.
Yes.
Back and write in narrative. But I think what comes in the most is first person. And And I feel like that really connects me main character. And just like I would do with acting, I try to drop into the, think like the character, think about, letting go would react and trying to just go with the character and get, and that does lead me off on tangents that get emotional, that maybe later I need to rein in a bit. But it definitely helps me in getting that perspective.
And so obviously it does help you with the character development, because as an actress or an actor, then you really have to dive into the motivation of the character. Do you find that sometimes you may give away too much too early, or or do you manage to like you said, rein in and let the reader discover things about your characters?
Yeah. So that is reining it in, and at times knowing that you don't want to characters say everything they're feeling, but show it in action, right? And that's also part of acting, because when you're doing a stage, you're given dialogue, you're not given stage direction.
Yes.
So the things that fill the dialogue in between are, as an actor, that character, and thinking, what would that actor do? Would they, throw the tissue? Would they sit down and huff? Would they slam the door? Would they take a pause and take a drink of wine before they answered the question? So, kind of things that fill in. And I think it makes scenes kind of richer, that makes it a little bit more maybe cinematic.
And I've seen a lot of reviewers say that about particularly authors who've had acting or directing backgrounds, is that it's almost cinematic the way they write. Yeah. Now, do you let your characters take over, or are you more of the director? Who steers the plot line of the storyline?
Probably the first draft, I let the characters. More when I get in this third draft, the director comes in. I definitely so, because well, the other two is I write bios for my characters, and not that the bio comes out, but I think it does inform who they are, creates the way that they would respond, and some things they would maybe a little bit different vocabulary that they might use based on their background.
And I've heard other authors, that, as a matter of fact, whenever I first started out, I would write the whole bio. And I find that some new authors, what they want to do is they end up putting that whole bio in the first chapter. It's called an information dump.
Right.
Did you manage? But is it your acting background that kept you from doing that?
Because it's not that some of the things in the background important in terms of they need to know that, but it does nuances in the character, and that's what's important. They don't need to know why the nuance exists.
That's true. You could even use it maybe later on, like like if somebody who's had an abusive relationships, has a history of that. You have the symptoms all there, but you don't necessarily tell about every abusive relationship they had. You just have the symptoms there.
The symptoms, exactly.
Well, who is your favorite character in 10,000 I Love You? And why is this person your favorite character?
Well, I will preface this by saying the reader's favorite character is, because he's consistently been the favorite character across the board. And I do really like Joshua, but
Now, who is Joshua?
Joshua is a young chef.
Okay.
So early on, and he's working at a grocery store, and that's when he meets our main character. And then later on in the story, he becomes a chef in San Francisco, and Kimberly, the main character, unite in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's a young guy, and he's, fun and creative and all those things that we love. But I also mean a young guy who's still in development. So I enjoyed writing him, but believe it or not, and I think some surprise, I really like Jay, the husband. And, because I love Kimberly, but I really like Jay. And it surprised some people, but I see him as a really guy who made a mistake and is trying really hard to redeem himself. I think there's something really admirable for somebody who has fallen and tries to pick themselves back up and correct for their past. So I admire him for that.
Now, Jay is an attorney and your husband's an attorney. Did you model Jay after your husband?
Well, other than the fact that my husband works in Sacramento.
Okay.
And Jay's in Sacramento. That's about where it ends. I've been married for a long time. There are things that will come out, having relationships that are just, you know what it's like to have been in a relationship for long. Certain things, they're just there when you have conversations and things like that. But Jay actually is quite different than my husband. And about Jay that I think are me.
And I think every author puts a little bit of themselves into every character because you know yourself.
Yeah. You do. But my husband doesn't look anything like, so that's that's kind of where it ends.
Okay, now you mentioned that Josh is a chef, and you mentioned earlier that that was one of your creative outlets when you were a young mom, was the cooking and the creating. And how does that influence your writing, or how is that, how much cooking do you do? Are you a gourmet cook like Josh?
I do cook like Josh. So pretty much all the recipes, all the food that's discussed in the book, I've made. Even some of Joshua's things I've made. And I do think writing kind of go together. They're both creative. And one of the things that I like is Sunday, if I spend, all day cooking a meal, it means that I am not in front of a screen, right?
Yes.
I'm not staring, I'm not trying to type, I'm not watching anything, I'm cooking. And there's time in between to really think about a book story that you're contemplating, or a scene while you're cooking, because all this noise, I guess, if that makes sense. And so I do think it kind of goes together, which is one of the reasons why Kimberly, my main character, also be a cook. So she's a writer and a cook. I think they kind of go together. I think you'd probably find a lot of writers cook.
Yeah. Well, I cook, and there's actually a lot of books that I've seen nowadays that they have recipes in the back.
Yeah.
Of the book. Do you have recipes in the back of your book? I
don't. But beef bourguignon featured in a scene, and with the beef bourguignon, that's what I serve for we had a dinner party of 12 for Christmas, and I beef bourguignon prep for that. And that's we do have a family recipe, homemade rolls, crescent rolls I make every year for Thanksgiving. So that's in the book. So there are little things in there.
Are you working on another book, or do you
I am.
keep playing on books, or do you just, as an idea hits you, you start working on the next one?
I kind of work on it when it hits me. So I've had this idea for a book for a while though, and I haven't started because 10,000 I Love You's going, and I work full time for Fortune 500 company, and so it's hard to find time. Thus, 4 years between the release of Degrees and the release of it's slow going when you're working full time. I have this idea, and I have some things looking forward to vacation at the end of the month where I'm going to have a lot to really get going with it. But the working title that I'm calling right, so it's going to be focused on a woman who has a husband, but not a husband at home.
Ah, okay. So she has a husband, but not a husband at home.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've heard of work husbands.
Work husbands?
Yeah. So it a relationship with the opposite sex at work, and they're kind of like your surrogate wife or husband at work that you could go to and talk to and confide in, you know.
Oh, I never heard of that. I never have heard of that. I would have considered that a mentor.
Well, it's a little bit more, it's a more intimate, I think, than a mentor. So it's, you know, it's the person I go to lunch, the person, if I get upset with my boss, I'm going to go talk to, because they'll understand what I'm going through.
Never heard of that. That would be news for a lot of people.
Out there, it's been working on but anyway, yeah. So once again, I'll be exploring some of the same themes. Similar things.
Yeah, well, you know, and so it seems like a general theme that you have in your books is relationships.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, is exploring relationships and spouses, and I guess work and that type of thing, you know,
and balancing it all and being true to yourself and all of that. I mean, finding where you are good with yourself. I think one of the things I would say, that if you've never read my writing, it doesn't it's not ponderous. That's what I'm saying. These are pretty quick reads. So that's one thing that I did pick up for my first 8, as well as just, I don't know, just my natural style. I like to keep, so I try to make it pretty easy reading, that you can read it in a couple days, and hopefully, you know, there's some humor in there. I'll cry a little bit sometimes, but it's intended to be not exactly a disposable, but as easy reading as a romance would be, but give you a little think about in terms of themes.
Thought-provoking.
Yeah,
thought-provoking, diving into relationships.
Absolutely. At some point, I'm going to try to write a straight romance. I have one straight that's in my drawer, that's been sitting there for about 10 years. And I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, that's it's really hard to write a straight romance. I'm like, wow, that's I had people tell me, oh, you should write romance, you know, you should write a romance series. That's a good idea. I love romance. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm terrible at this.
Yeah, I got a blogger mad at me because I write murder mysteries, and I wrote humorous guest posts about how much harder it is to write mystery than romance, because there's only so many ways that you can kiss a person. And the blogger was a romance author, and she got mad at me. I had no idea. She sent me an email saying, you know, her feathers were ruffled. saying it's
Yeah,
very hard to write a romance. It is really
it's
hard.
really hard. I really admire, I love Rachel Gibson, and she recently transitioned over and writing women's fiction, and like, oh, Rachel, I loved you as a romance writer, and you're doing, I read your last fiction. I loved it. So somebody that can do both. I'm like, so I might tackle it. I might try again. Might give it another go. But that's kind of where I'm going writing. I have some short stories on my website. So if anybody's interested in a short story, based on growing up in Washington State, husband keeps telling me I need to write a coming of age story based on Yak growing up in Yakima Valley, because it's a very unique place to grow up. It's the state of Washington, and the people that live there come Norwegians who have immigrated to the United States, landed there, and we got lots of dairy farmers there because of that. We have a lot of people there that came over when Oklahoma had the Dust Bowl. So you get a lot of Okies there. My family's Okies. That's how we got there. And then you also have a lot of Mexicans who migrated with doing crop work. So you've got a very Mexican population, Hispanic population there. So it's a really odd mix that have grown up there. And now, of course, you've got second, third generation people there. You've got a lot of people that kind of look like me, where you've got a mixed race going on, a unique dialect that goes on there, because you've got all these influences on the dialect. I went to college, and my teacher said, "You have to be from Yakima Valley." And I said, "How do you know?" And she said, "Dialect. It's the only place that we ever hear that." And I'm like, oh, so I had to work on that.
Yeah, I interviewed an author that was from Paris, last month, and I didn't realize, she said that I had a very heavy accent, and she had this French accent.
Yeah.
And she said, "You're the one with the accent."
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah,
you don't because you hear it all the time.
accents.
Yeah, you hear it all the time.
You do. So I'm about that. I have some short stories, but I'm thinking about doing the coming of age. I have some different ideas about that.
They go to your website, then they can read some of your short stories.
They can't. I have a short story up there. I should pop up, but complements it. But the other thing that they could do is they could download the first 3 chapters of either Degrees of Love, 10,000 I Love Yous, or both. Get a taste for the books and see if they like it, if they like, the style or the voice, whatever you want to call it. If it intrigues them, they could try it out and see if they like it.
If you enjoyed this interview, then do be sure to give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to receive notifications for future author interviews. Until next time, happy reading from Authors on iTours.